So first, I'd like to thank everyone at the Institute for the Humanities, the UIC Department of History, Phi Beta Kappa Honor Society, and the University of Illinois Presidential Initiative, Creative Digital Services, and the University Library for putting everything together and organizing this event. I'm Janet Swachino. I'm the Digital Publishing Librarian at the UIC Library, and I'm the co-director of the Digital Humanities Initiative. I'm excited to be joined today by Edward L. Ayers. Edward Ayers is the Tucker Boatwright Professor of the Humanities at the University of Richmond, where he is President Emeritus. He has been named National Professor of the Year and received the National Humanities Medal from President Obama at the White House. He's also Executive Director of New American History, dedicated to sharing innovative work in words, maps, audio, and video with broad audiences and the nation's schools. Ayers will speak about his commitment to the digital humanities and how his projects have developed over 30 years in the field. He will focus on recent projects, including New American History, Southern Journey, and BUNC, which feature exceptional maps and data visualizations. We will have a question and answer session at the end of the talk, so please submit your questions to the Q&A section. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thanks very much. It's great to see everybody. I'm not muted now, right? I'm speaking. Good. So 30 years, 45 minutes, that should be pretty easy to take care of all of that. Surely I've learned something in that time. I look forward to talking about it. I'll tell you the origin story in many ways. And since our emphasis today is on multi-ethnic, basically I've had this utopian vision since the 1970s that the digital world can actually advance democracy. And I began back when quantitative history seemed like a good idea. I joke that seemed, we have a name for that, we call it Thursday. It didn't really last that long, but in the 70s, the idea that by including people who did not leave records of their own thoughts and words in censuses and other kinds of records, we could write a more democratic history. And since I've always kind of had a bent toward things that are shiny and new, that appealed to me when I was in graduate school. And therefore I chose as my dissertation topic, something that seemed as hard as could possibly be. I thought, well, the language at the time was that we were going to write the history of the inarticulate, which is just a terrible phrase, but it was what was the buzzword. And I thought, who are sort of the people least likely to leave a mark on the historical record. And I thought it'd be people on chain gangs and prisons in the South. So my dissertation was all about, called Vengeance and Justice, Crime and Punishment in the 19th Century American South. And my mom, who's a fifth grade school teacher, mimeographed forms for me that we went out and my wife and I lived in a tent, a big canvas tent from Sears in Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia, and Tennessee in the dead of summer, and went to different archives and recorded all that we could find about the people who were entrapped in the Southern prison system across the 19th century. Then crank through miles of microfilm to record all the people in court records and all these kinds of things. So when I got ready to set out on this journey, and my wife had given up her job for the summer to accompany me, the dissertation committee gave my proposal back to them. And they said, okay, but they don't think you're going to find any of this stuff. So that was a great heartening thing as I got ready to say, honey, we're going to drive to Mississippi from Connecticut now. So we don't know if there's going to be anything there or not. There turned out to be enough that I gathered up all those forms, then brought them back, and then paid somebody to punch them into cards, and then carried the hundreds of cards to the big computing center where I presented them to white-coated attendants behind glass, who then submitted the cards to the machine in a kind of a priest-like manner. And then I just saw all my findings come out, accordion paper, proudly carry them among all the scientists and engineers back to my table and flipped through them and saw that it said error 1732 5,000 times and realized, okay, this may be harder than I realized. So then I had to learn SPSS, and I actually had to teach myself what multiple regression was and how to do it and what it might mean. And none of these things are native to my abilities. And so it was a painful process to figure out how to do this, but I did generate enough information that it made a dissertation, then a book, and then I got tenure. So, okay, that's enough of computer stuff. I'm done with that. And frankly, by the early, I was a professor at University of Virginia, and starting in 1980, the digital really was fading. It had been replaced with cultural history. And so I always tried to be as cool as possible. So I wanted to be where the action was. But the problem was that once I had bitten the apple of quantification, I saw you actually can include people in a story who you cannot include any other way. So then I pictured this, what turned out to be a massive book about the South after Reconstruction, the promise of the New South, and created a database for millions of people from the censuses, from ICPSR, Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research, of all the censuses. We made all these big data sets. And I probably spent a year of the 8 years I spent creating that book, learning a new system of computing. This time I could actually run it from a terminal myself, and it didn't require cards, but we would kind of use machine readable data and create these forms. But there was the clock was ticking the whole time we were using the mainframe, and you only had a certain amount of time. And I was doing it over a 2400 baud modem out in the country. And if you made a mistake on SPSS X now, it was set you back. And so, but I did all these things. Then I made these maps that involved going down to the computer center and watching them do all this cross-hatching, literally drawing it. And then you do it 13 times for the 13 states in the American South, and brought them home and exploited our young son to help cut out all along the Mississippi River. Then we posted them on a big poster board and glued them together and took a picture of it. Is how I made a map of showing these things like railroads and towns and things. Then that was in the book, and I swore I was never going to touch a computer again, because it's been a year of the 8 years that I did on all that. And then they had a session about my book at the Social Science History Association meeting, at which one of the speakers announced that, well, Ed Ayers' book marks the death of social science history. And I said, why is that? Because you know how to do all this stuff, but you've buried it all in the back. And so I would come up with a R-square, finding a 0.6273 of a correlation between cotton and populism. And then the text I'd say, often, because that's really all that means, but would not actually feature really what was a massive amount of number crunching. So that's by 1991, I was finishing that up. And so then I was done with computing. But because I had to bother the people in engineering school to help me run the Unix workstations to do all of this stuff, they needed somebody, a token humanist, to put on the university-wide committee for computing. And I was happy to do that because all the people have been very patient and helped me through all the mistakes I've made. We went to a meeting early on, and it turned out the president of the university had been out with somebody from IBM, and they were interested in making a gift to the university of $100,000 if we could think of something cool to ask for. We went around the table, and people from medicine said medicine, people from engineering said engineering. And they got to me, and I said, we're your highest ranked departments, and we don't even have computers on our desks in history and English. Maybe there's something we could do with digital technology and the humanities. And they all laughed at me, as they so frequently did. But the chair of the committee, William Wolfe, who ended up being the head of the National Academy of Engineering and actually helped invent TCP/IP that you'll recognize from early days on the internet, said, maybe there's something to this, that we're not going to be MIT here at Virginia, but maybe if we could think about the way to use these computers for the humanities, that could be pretty exciting. He said, Ed, do you have an idea of what that you'd like to do? And I said, no, it's pretty clear in the 1990s that the age of computing is over, and that there's not going to be really any interesting thing to do there. What I want to do now, after having done this study that covered a half century and 25 million people, is I want to write a very granular history where what we have is every piece of information about all the people, black and white, male and female, and soldier and civilian, through 2 counties through the entire era of the American Civil War. And I want to go into the archives and get my hands dirty again and smell that smell of old records and compile all that. And as I described it, I realized I was actually describing a database. And so I said, well, what I'd like to do, so again, this is 91, what if we made a database that included all that information, and students who don't happen to be at a place with a big research library could actually explore the evidence of the past for themselves. That probably involves putting on some kind of tape and sending it to somebody's computing center where it'll be available. So maybe we could do that. So we ended up doing that. and IBM gave us $100,000, with which we bought, I believe, 8, and strap yourselves in, workstations with 17-inch, yes, color monitors, and 1 server that's probably about as powerful as a fourth of your iPhone right now. But that's how much it took to do all that. But the idea of it being networked off a server was a great idea. So we didn't know how to do it. And right now there's a competing model, which would have been Apple and CD-ROMs. And my friend Roy Rosenzweig, George Mason, was making this textbook, Who Built America, working with the cool company Voyager to make, and I went and visited him. He actually had like a little video on a computer, and it was like, no, you can't do that. You do all of it. And so that was one model, but what that does, of course, is it puts you in a proprietary system. I was working with people at the library who said, well, here's another way of thinking about this. We use something called SGML, Standard Generalized Markup Language, for MARC records. I'm pandering to the librarians, but it's all true. No, this would have happened without that we were, and that's another decision we made. We would be in the library, and the library welcomed us. We joked about SGML stood for sounds good, maybe later. But the idea would be that you would tag, stop me when this sounds familiar, text, and so a computer would know that when you have brown, it's a name and not a color, right? And so we started thinking about how we could use SGML to hold all this together. In the meantime, when I did the demo for IBM, we did a scan of a newspaper, a scan of a diary, a scan of a map, and I had it on a numeric keyboard. And I said, imagine if you would, there was some way to connect this with that. And it's an image on the screen. And my point was, computers are just now good enough for humanists to use because we can see images on the screen. It's, this sort of line editing stuff that's not going to make it. So IBM, of course, was not surprised by the notion that you could do all this, but they said, okay. So we started building this project, which I call the Valley of the Shadow, named after the 23rd Psalm, because it's about the Shenandoah Valley, at the Great Valley of Pennsylvania, Virginia. The whole premise being, let's choose 2 places that are as like as possible in every way except slavery, and then go to a war within 6 months and kill each other for the next 4 years. Kind of rubbing against the grain of this idea the Civil War is inevitable, the outcome's inevitable, it's industrial North, agrarian South. These people are the same soil, same climate, same crops, same religion, same ethnicity, same families, everything, and yet they can be motivated enough to go to war to kill each other, okay? But what we're going to do is we're going to put the entire census, population, agriculture, manufacturing, slave owner census, 10,000 pages in newspapers, every letter, diary, and everything that we can find. Thinking, it's 2 counties. How much could there be? Right? And they're just anonymous counties. They're not like, it's the county next to Gettysburg, but it's not where Gettysburg was. And it's Shenandoah Valley, Stanton, Virginia, not particularly important. So we launched out on this, started building an SGML. And then one day, and the whole idea behind this is the Institute for Advanced Technology and Humanities. And the idea was that we wouldn't ask a humanist to do the irrational career-killing things that I'd done before, which is for someone who doesn't actually have any talent or ability to teach himself how to do everything involved with computing. Instead, we would have computer scientists join with the humanist in these different projects. And Jerome McGann, an actual famous historian, editor of great poets of England, and a theorist of all this, was the other big project on the Rossetti project. His had all these beautiful images and poetry and all of this. I had ugly old newspapers and census records, right? And so from the beginning, it's interesting, we were talking about English and history. We sort of branched in 2 different divisions on that regard, and began building the Rossetti project in the Valley of the Shadow. So my computer science friend called me and said, Ed, you need to come down to my office. I want to show you something. I went down there. He says, look, here's something new called Mosaic. and it's based on a baby version of SGML. They're calling it HTML, and they're making what they're called sites on what they're calling the World Wide Web. I said, that sounds awkward. I can't imagine that's going to catch on. And he said that we can convert the Valley of the Shadow into a website. And so, as you can see, I'm in complete control of my destiny. This was all, I was a great visionary at all of this. And we began building the Valley of the Shadow. I could show you the very first versions of it, which are, you know what things looked like in 1993. But we did devise over the next few years this model, which are basically a floor plan of a library. It's actually Jeffersonian since we were at the University of Virginia. And it has an insane number of things in it. And I've worked with many colleagues and friends who helped us how to figure out how to do things that had not been done before. Like what would you actually do with newspapers? Oh, why this is not, can't see. Yeah, okay, it is doing things. So we put in all these, and it's graduate students, by and large, who are paid quite well to enter all these newspapers. My vision, of course, is you do optical character recognition and all this. But we sent them off to people who at NASA, and they said, we can read a typed page on the moon, but we can't read these old broken newspapers. And so we actually had to type them all in, and with all this tagging. So this is just one page of one of them. And then we had the images. At this time, PDF files didn't exist. We had to actually write script to figure out how you would show the image of a page of a newspaper, typed in all the censuses. Okay, so, and I did not cash in on this with Ancestry.com, but we were doing all that before they were doing it. And how it would be that you would be able to manipulate, and I tell the story, our daughter at the time came in, 11 years old, and she said, Daddy, are there any other girls named Hannah? And I said, yeah. And we found out there were 6 white and 5 black girls named Hannah. And so you can see a middle school could find themselves in history. The letters and diaries are the things that people have loved. And it turned out that we found enormous amounts of, who would have thought there would have been as many letters and diaries and all that we found. So we made this, and then people said, well, yeah, Ed, but that's not history. That's an archive. And my friend Roy Rosenzweig wrote an article for the Journal of American History and called this an intentional archive, because rather than taking something that a library or an archive already possessed and digitizing it, which is a common model, we began with a question or a problem. And so I know that we were maybe talking about ways to make digital humanities applied. This is something I stumbled on. Begin with a question. Begin with what's the problem you're trying to solve, rather than begin with the collection you're just digitizing because it'd be cool to share it. Okay, so what this means is that we had to go out and find all of these things. So we had what we call a history harvest. We went to the communities and said, if you have something that you'd like from the Civil War era that you'd like to be willing to bring into the local library, we will scan it, which we had to explain to people what that was. That was a strange concept in 92 and 3. And then you can keep it, but we'll add it. Then, so there's probably, I don't know, 50 different origins of all the archive that we put in there. And but it began, and you can see just from this that I get it. There are 2 sides, and there's before, during, and after. You see, there's no words telling you what to do, right? And the whole idea is, and this is a phrase that Jerry McGann used, it's potentiated space. Okay, it says you're going to have to do something for this to reply. We made it with this very slick pre-Apple going to a white background model, because we were sending this out over 2,400 baud modems to middle schools in Nebraska. That was the whole model. We did demos and broke a server when 25 whole students in New York City used it at the same time. And I tell that, it's funny, but it's also what it was like at the time, and this is going to be a major theme. How do you take advantage of what a world that's not built for us is offering us? Right? Nobody had in mind to make anything like this. And frankly, if you were a business, nobody would have made this. hey, here's the thing. We're going to do the Civil War, but we're going to choose two places you've never heard of and have all these people you've never heard of. And it's just going to be exploring. How's that sound, right? So it began with a scholarly question, and it began growing out of that same impulse that had led me to computing in the first place, was how would we do a democratic history, in which don't know before that there's 11 girls and women named Hannah, but that the question will be generated in real time. And so people could assign this to a class of 500, and the question would be what caused the Civil War? And they could come in and they could look at the census and see how different the economies were, or they could look at the newspapers and see how the rhetoric of secession and of resistance to secession grew, or they could look at African-American history and see how that unfolded. And so it's build it once and use it many millions of times. Now, on the front page, it says copyright 1993, 2007. Copyright doesn't mean anything. I did it in case somebody wanted to buy the film rights. They had yet to do so, if anybody is out there interested in doing it. But it's also because I wrote 2 books using nothing but this. So I went to Stanford and using only the Valley of the Shadow, wrote this book, In the Presence of Mine Enemies, and it links to all the footnotes. And we claimed this to be the first book for which the entire evidentiary base is shared with you. So you don't like my story? You've got the entire record. That's all that I've used to do it again. And so we made this. And shamelessly, I'll say the book won the Bancroft Prize, but they didn't mention that it was from a digital archive. And so the whole idea was to have so much detail that I could write a novel, that I would know the color of the eyes of every soldier, which I do hear from soldiers' records and things like that. I could know the weather on any given day because of the newspaper report. And it would be out of this plenitude you could do this. So I wrote, it was so much, I started writing it and turned out it was going to be like a 5,000-page book. And so, well, that's not going to work. So nobody needs to know what the weather was every day, right? So what's the voice I'm going to use to do all this? Now, this is important because it's still not history. And I was already a full professor, so I could get away with this. But I had all these young people who were working with me, attaching their futures to the idea that there might be such a thing as digital history. But if it doesn't make an argument, it's not history. And if it's not a book, it's not history. So I wrote a book. It turned out it took 2 books. And the first one came out in 2003, but then I was dean and then I became a president. So then I finished volume 2 in 2017. And it goes all the way through Reconstruction. Along the way, my good friend and colleague, Will Thomas, and I wrote what we claim to be the first native digital scholarly article. And it's in the American Historical Review. And the whole idea would be, what if you didn't just do what we've done now, which is take pictures of books, but actually thought from the ground up? What would it be like to take advantage of, I don't know who invented this phrase, but we're supposed to say it in the digital humanities, the affordances of the digital. So, well, one thing you could do is you could show all the evidence that the article is based upon. In my sarcastic moments at the time, I'd say what we call footnotes are just broken hyperlinks. It says that you could travel to the Sorbonne and see this, or you can make a digital article in which you would actually share all the evidence, as in science, right? And our discipline could become democratized. Again, you'll see a theme by sharing the entire evidentiary base of the arguments that we're making. But you could also do the other thing. What else footnotes have are historiography, how we got here, the scholarly literature. And so that you could put not just a link into it, but you could link on it and it would give you the origins, but it would also give you a synopsis. It would give you excerpts from it, and then it would link back in to show you how we use that piece of argument, of evidence in our own argument. But we could also do things like you could search, but I think we've made this up. How would you know what you'd read if there's not page numbers, if it's not sequential? You see the red dots on here? Those are the pages we've looked at, and you can choose any other dot. It would take you to that page, and you can get this idea, right? So it's better in its presentation of evidence. It's better in its presentation of historiography. It still makes an argument. It was on the front page of the American Historical Review. And nobody has ever done anything remotely like it in the next 20 years. So I would count this as a bold but failed experiment. And the reviews came in and they said, yeah, this is, I mean, we labeled this clearly. Here is the summary of the argument, and so that, I don't just, apparently doesn't have a summary of the argument. But that's the thing too, we're hosting it at Virginia all these years because the American Historical Association doesn't have a server to host it on, right? So we did this. Will is an endowed professor now at Nebraska, so I didn't hinder his career in digital humanities. He's gone on and done these wonderful projects himself. So on one hand, I domesticated the project and made it as much of a book and showed this is not a threat to traditional scholarship. Or what we can also do is we can reinvent scholarship in a way that's actually accomplishes the purposes of scholarship more effectively than traditional scholarship. So the Valley of the Shadows won some awards. I was in Wired magazine with a picture. My wife said the way you always wanted somebody to think you look, but you don't, which is really intense and deep. And in 1996, that was pretty cool being in Wired, and so it was great, but it took us to 2007 to finish it. And when I left Virginia to go to Richmond, this is where the librarians come in again, and the president of the university, they paid money to go back through and have it all, every link checked, every file nailed down. And then later they went back. So we built an XML. So we started in WordPerfect, I don't kid you, and then HTML and then XML. But then along the way, and it's all open source, and it's all just ASCII text. And then went through again and made it so. And the gentleman who did this says, yeah, this is like a 57 Chevy that's running off a Prius engine now, because you had to build it with everything. It was heavy iron to do all this. And I said, well, I'm kind of a car guy. That sounds like a poor weight to power ratio, but I know what you mean. And so I give the fact that this site from 2007 is still working and is used all the time is important, because it's a major problem of digital humanities is preservation. Okay. The other thing that's good for is that if we wanted this to catch on, digital humanities, and here's a paradox perhaps you can help me think of. There's lots of job descriptions that call for digital humanist, but it's very hard to see anybody getting tenure for it. And it's hard to see it really taking place in the profession. And so this is something I've worried about for a long time. And so the American Historical Association asked me to chair a committee to come up with guidelines for professional evaluation of digital scholarship by historians. And you can click the PDF, and we acknowledged that why is it not getting traction? It's because historians don't build archives, they make arguments. So I'm sorry, if you're building a digital project, you're going to have to make an argument with you. And so this is different from some of the great projects in English, the great Whitman Archive or things like this. The point is not to make an argument there, but rather to present a record or an archive in which that can be shared in advanced scholarship. But historians say our job is to actually say something about it. So we said that here, and I think some digital humanists felt this was not true to the spirit of what we're all about. Why are you touching the brakes on this? And I'm saying because I want people to get jobs in advance, because I've had many graduate students and who have yoked their careers to this. And I tell them, you have to write a traditional dissertation and do this too. But if you do this too, you really increase your chances of getting a job. But then you get a job, and then they expect you to keep doing it. So the profession is not built to foster this. So this is 2015, I think it was, and you can look and see what it is. We worked with the MLA, we didn't work with, we looked at what they'd done 2 or 3 years earlier and tried to tailor ours for historians, and you can see how it works. So we're trying to lay out what departments need to do, what scholars need to do, what the profession needs to do to make this all work. So 2007, I left Virginia to go to Richmond as president. And when I went there, they said, well, we'd like for you to continue your digital work. And it's like, oh gosh, no, don't build that into my contract. But they said, if you were a biologist, you might want a lab. We'd want you to do this. So we'd like for you to do that. So I thought that would be great. And so when I went to Richmond, I created the Digital Scholarship Lab. And now, one thing I'd not thought of, why did I call it that? That doesn't roll off the tongue. You've heard Valley of the Shadow, that's all kind of cool. But because if it's not scholarship, it doesn't count for professional advancement. So I'm trying to show that we're actually doing scholarship. Three people actually are the Digital Scholarship Lab, and I'm not one of them. But I did win a grant from the Mellon Foundation to do what we call now American Panorama, a digital atlas of American history. Because having built the Valley of the Shadow, I said, I never want to oversee a project where we're typing in 10,000 pages of newspapers again, or the entire census. And by this point, of course, I become president the same year the iPhone comes out. Okay, so which is striking to remember how recently that was, that capacity was there. Now, the problem is too much machine readable material. It's not digitizing things, it's actually making sense of things. How would we do this? Well, I've tried doing this before with multiple regression analysis and tables and graphs. That's not really the best way to do it. What we would need to do, I think, is mapping and using GIS to see complex patterns. And so Mellon bought that idea. And then my friends and colleagues at the Digital Scholarship Lab actually figured out how to do what I said we would do. And they've made this. Okay, so you can see, going back to the multi-ethnic emphasis of all of this, how would we keep democratizing the number of people who can participate in this, who can do it, and then who can use it? I decided that a map is the most welcoming way to see complex patterns. Everybody can see themselves. And what I always say is I want every 7th grade girl in America to be able to see herself in American history. Okay, that's kind of the idea. And so they've made some really great projects. I'll show some that I think are especially successful. And I'll just, how many times I can say, I didn't make these. This is Rob Nelson, Justin Madron, Nathaniel Ayers are the people who made this. This is the foreign-born population of every county in the United States from 1850 to 2010. Let's just click on a place at random. This is 2010 in Will, Illinois. Is that nearby here? That's the county. And you can see that it shows the origins of all the people who were born elsewhere in that year: Mexico, India, Philippines, Poland. I don't think anybody would have made that list if you just guess where people are from. And then you can choose any of those places, and it redraws the map to show you where the people from India lived in the United States in 2010. How much computing power is going on here, right? How much data is this representing? It's incredible, but how appealing is it? And how many different forms is it showing the same data, right? You can see all that. And so the project that I ended up developing was a little bit later, New American History, and my great friend and colleague, Annie Evans, who's the Director of Education and Outreach, said, Ed, you don't have to wait for high school or college for this to be meaningful. 4th graders can sit down beside each other and say, so where are your grandparents from, your parents from, and do this and have a conversation to democratize American history by having everybody realize that they have a place in all this, right? And so then you can, since everybody lives in a place, having a map, everybody can see themselves in American history. And you can see here in 1850 how different the North and the South were in immigration and so forth. All these things are not telling you what to think. And so it's like the Valley of the Shadow in the sense that it is suggesting, it's a potentiated space. Maybe be interesting to know how every county has a different path through foreign-born population across time. And maybe you don't know anything about American history, but you know where you live. And suddenly you can go back and see how different things were in 1970 from the way they are today, much less. And so that you can see how beautiful these things are. That become a premise of mine, is that unfortunately a lot of digital humanities is ugly. And we now have kids who are raised on multi-billion-dollar video games. Things need to look appealing to them. So that's why we are getting ready to rebuild the Valley of the Shadow We are redoing it now so that it will scale to a cell phone, so that a 7th grade girl in somewhere doesn't have good internet access will be able to use the Valley of the Shadow in a way that it doesn't now, because it was just built for a fixed screen, right? So, and then for each project, the folks at the Digital Scholarship Lab had to invent new ways of showing this. This is every congressional election in the United States from 1850 to 2010, with every kind of capacity that you would have on election night today. Which county, which districts flipped, strength of victory, Republican, third parties. You can see how it's changing over time. And you can choose any place. You see how cool it is. And you switch it over to a cartogram. You can switch it to strength of victory. Isn't this cool? And this is all done by three people. And it's all shared. Okay, that's another theme. Everything we've built is built, it's free, and it's also open. And we will share the data with anybody who wants to do anything like this. You'll also see how have I been able to do this. I finished the Valley of the Shadow. I won an NEH grant. The first year they turned us down because there wasn't a category for building something digital in 1993. But then it developed and they gave us this. But then I became dean with the idea that if you would support Virginia Center for Digital History, I was able to finish the Valley of the Shadow by, as I call it, selling body parts to sustain it. And then I've been able to do these things because I became a president and it was built in. But then I went to Mellon and got a $750,000 grant to do all this. You'll notice something else about this. This is different. I decided early on, what's the point of all this? Is to share it as broadly as possible. And I'm not interested in making the most arcane argument that I can about anything in particular. I want it to be of use to anybody. And so we've branched off into public history as a defining characteristic of what we're doing. By far the most influential thing that my colleagues have made is mapping inequality, which is about redlining. I'll go ahead and show this is a different version of it, which is very cool as well. So we'll just choose Chicago, for example, just to choose a place at random. So Rob and colleagues from Johns Hopkins, Nathan Connolly, and from Virginia Tech, or at University of Michigan, digitized every redlining map in the Library of Congress and made it really amazingly cool. And this is now used. The New York Times has a new article about the way the environments today reflect the same patterns as redlining. This is systemic racism. It's not critical race theory though, but it's, for all the counties. But you see what this shows is how it draws direct changes from what was there in the 1930s and 40s with what's today. How have each of these districts changed, and tying it to the social vulnerability index of crime, health, and so forth. So you can see all that yellow lines there in the middle that plummet down into red. Those are areas that were considered marginal that are now considered dangerous. You can see gentrification. Some of these lines are going down from the bottom left all the way zooming up to green areas. You'll know your own landscape, and you can see how sharply segregated Chicago was and is, and how the continuities are, and also how the changes are, right? The same thing too, it's place-based, it's open-ended, it has a social purpose. Why would you want to know about the foreign-born population? Why would you want to know about redlining? All these things, why would you want to know about how your district has voted over time? When did it flip from one party to another? And all these things. This has been used by Zillow it's remarkably, as far as I know, I believe it's the most socially useful digital humanities project there is. And again, I had nothing to do with it, but it is at the Digital Scholarship Lab. I do think that's a useful way of thinking about things. Why would I want to do this? Is there anybody who cares would want to see it? I'm giving you quick overviews of things that we can return to anything that you want to see, but just to show you what we're doing. So that's the Digital Scholarship Lab. So then, and there's very many very cool projects on here. So then I decided in 2015 that 8 years as president, I'd done the things I said we would do. And I wanted to get back to finish volume 2 of The Valley of the Shadow, and also had other things I wanted to do. And I thought, well, what do I really care about now? Okay. And I think everybody in the United States studies American history, but they think it's often the most boring subject in school. How can everything that happened before today be boring? Only if we work really hard to make it boring. Wouldn't it be great if we can make American history in the schools exciting and engaging? I mean, I wasn't interested in it at all into graduate school. And the idea of the past just seems irrelevant. So I thought, I made up this new project called New American History. And the idea, and the idea would be, let's use different modalities to capture young people's interest. If they're interested in video, if they're interested in audio, if they're interested in maps, if they're interested in text, interested in fiction, let's coordinate all that. So we launched New American History. And I'm going to show it to you in a minute. But the other thing I want to show is a project we made in the meantime at the Digital Scholarship Lab, which is Southern Journey. This is the Migrations of the American South, 1790 to 2020. And you'll see that it has these little medals on there. It won the prize for best cartography from the people who invented GIS last year. And it's done by Justin Madron and Nathaniel Ayers. You will recognize maybe the last name. Yes, he's my son, with a background in kinetic imaging in a school of design, who couldn't care less, frankly, about history, but he figured out how. And so I went to Justin. I was given these lectures at Louisiana State University, which are usually a 120-page book. And I said, hey, here's an idea. Instead of doing a 100-page book, what do you say we do a full-size coffee table book with 80 original full-color maps, that invents a new way of doing all this. And LSU Press said, okay. I started to bring it with me, but it was heavy, and I didn't want to be bringing it. But it's a beautiful, beautiful book. But you'll notice another thing I'm trying to do here. Let's make a book, because fulfill the obligation to LSU to do this. But let's also make a story map. And so we made the story map of Southern Journey. Justin and Nate figured out how to do this. These are, it's covered with little hexagonal shapes called hex bins. Those are smaller than counties because, as you can imagine, the county boundaries of every county in the South are constantly changing over this period. So how would we go about showing changes in population if the county boundaries are changing? You also know that if a big county might have the same amount of people coming into it, but it's a proportion of the county, it'll look bigger. The election map for 2016 looks like it's all red, but there are more voters who are in the blue areas. So they invented this way. Areas that are varying shades of blue is where the population of this particular ethnicity, in this case white people, is declining. Areas that are varying shades of gold is where the population is increasing of this ethnicity. So you can see here, and this, we're using the population census, the data already existed. Fortunately for me, unfortunately for American history, the only criteria that's been consistent since 1790 is race. So we are able to trace where Black people and white people have lived overall from 1790 to 2020. So you can see here, the Chesapeake of Virginia and of North Carolina white people are fleeing. They're moving into the bluegrass of Kentucky, into upcountry of South Carolina. The amount of information on this map is amazing, and the things that you can do, but it's like an fMRI. This is not made to show something that I already knew. It's registering what happened, and then my job was to write a book explaining what this shows. It turned out that was really hard. I had to read a lot of books to be able to do this, but you can see and compare it then to Black population change. You can see that the same depopulating of the enslaved population, but you can see that they're being moved into the Piedmont of Virginia. This is when Thomas Jefferson has his plantation. I live right here. But you can see some Black people are being taken to the bluegrass, but you can also see that the rice district is still growing. But you can see areas right next to them, Black people are being taken away from, right? So it's complex patterns. How do you turn this back into words, right? And it's like trying to describe a film still. And so it was an interesting challenge. And you can see as we cover all of this, and you can see how radical, look at this. This is just 10 years later. Look at that, and you can start seeing already white people moving to Louisiana. And you can see filling in the Nashville Basin. You can do things on story maps you can't do on paper. You can do things on paper you can't do on story maps too. It's cool, like put all the words that explain all of this. Here you're actually seeing the beginning of the Black Belt. You can see how the Black Belt is beginning in discontinuous process. It's not just in one place. You can see how large parts of Mississippi and Florida are not being populated yet. You may wonder why that is. Here's why. This is very cool. This is, you see what an animation can do. These are the areas that were ceded from indigenous people from just 1814 to 1835. Look at the vast areas. The whole American South is still occupied by Native people as late as 1814. So we know about the Trail of Tears, but you see the scale is much larger than that. And you can see the cool things that you can do with animations. And then this is basically you have by 1830, 1840, the South as we know it. And we can go and you can look at voting patterns today. They show the exact same pattern of where the Black population was taken. But you can do other things that are impossible otherwise. And you can also, by having command over all of this information, you can do things like discover, you recognize that we repurposed the map from foreign-born population, right, to include into this. But here I said, guys, would it be possible to compare the sex ratio of Black people across space? And they say, sure, they run it. And they come up with this. And what it shows is that areas that are varying shades of yellow or gold, or where male population predominates, areas that are varying shades of kind of green, or where the female population. And what this is showing, something that we knew, is that 90% of the people purchased from the slave markets of the Upper South for Louisiana are men. And then they buy young women in their teen years to bear as many children as they possibly can. But why is Virginia, the oldest area of enslavement, shows this? I think it's because the large numbers of white enslavers who can only afford one person by a female. Because not only can she do most of the work that men can do, but she can bear children that then belong to you. And I think that's what we're seeing here across most of the South, is that people, the small slaveholders, own one or two people and they buy women. These are men who are left over in the Upper South. And I think that, so again, this is like, we'd never seen this before. We didn't know it. I had no reason to expect it, but this is what digital history can do. It can present new questions and in new kinds of methods. So Southern Journey goes on all the way. It tries to explain secession. We can do cool things like heat maps. I used this in a class here yesterday. This is where the United States Army comes into contact with African-American people. You can actually see the patterns of emancipation. You can also see that 3.5 million of the 4 million people held in slavery never came into contact with the United States Army. And that's where the idea of Juneteenth comes from. They hear about in June of 1865 that slavery's over, but they didn't know because you had this. So the idea here is to present the most complex evidence I possibly can in the most appealing and legible form that I can, and then write a book where I live up to the responsibility of the historian to explain what this means. Okay, so And up to this point, it's been 2 years and that the book's not been reviewed. I'll be curious to see if it's going to, it may just be that's how long it takes the JAH or the AHR to review something, but it may also be, what's this coffee table book? Is this actual history? Well, Ayers has been around a long time, so maybe it is history, but is this a monograph? Is this, so we'll see. I'm not paranoid about it. It just hasn't been reviewed yet. And it came out in 2020. One thing about it we were able to do is we actually end with the COVID crisis. The press held the presses until we made maps of the COVID crisis. But anyway, so that's Southern Journey. But that's still not, and this is where I'm going to end with this. So it's interesting. I have these little symbols from Zoom that keep me from seeing. There we go. Okay. So I was teaching a class when I was a freshman while I was president called Touching the Past. And it was basically a series of unauthorized experiments on 18-year-olds to find out, what do you, coming out of places like New Trier High School here in Chicago, what do you actually know about American history? Now, so my class would fill up because I had awesome letterhead for letters of recommendation for law school. But I would say, why are you in this class? And they'd say, well, I had a great teacher in high school, or I visited somewhere that made an impact on me. But they had no idea. So I would say, who can tell me what a Bunsen burner is? They all could. I said, who can tell me what a monograph is? And one student said, does it have anything to do with monotonous? I said, well, often. And realize that we never show these students why we have new ideas about the past. And they would come in and they would say, okay, there's two things. History is built on primary documents, and then it's based on bias or opinion. And I said, that's just all wrong. That's not the way it is. And bias or opinion are the only reasons that historians would differ. Does it occur to you that maybe we learn new things and change our minds, just like science? And it hadn't occurred to them. And a lot of the teaching guides that we have, and I'm going to show you, there's an article written by my colleague, Catherine, in the latest version of New American History about all this, portray it as historians disagreeing with each other, right? Rather than building on each other. And so warring ideas. And so I thought, and I'd have assignments, I had to go into the library and look at the books by all of the recent winners of the Bancroft Prize. And they would come back and they'd say, you don't see this, they're not reviewed anywhere. It's like samizdat, it's like this hidden literature that the world doesn't know about, but that your profession values. And the best-selling books don't have any impact at all on the profession. And it became clear to me that if something doesn't exist in the digital world for these students, it doesn't exist. They're not, how else would they discover a monograph? They wouldn't. So I decided that we would make something we call bunk, which is named sarcastically after the Henry Ford quote, history is more or less bunk. The only history that matters to Tinker's Dam, he said, is the history we make today. So bunk is a real-time curation of representations of the American past in all media every day, done by humans, done by undergraduates who are trained and then paid, overseen by Tony Field, who was the producer of Backstory, the podcast, NPR podcast show that Kevin was on twice, that we did for 12 years, with a journalism background. And you can see the idea is, so this is today's, I didn't know what I was going to show. We have something from the Washington Post, The Guardian, New York Times Style magazine, something else from the Time, Made by History, which is a blog, The Atlantic. So which of these would you like for me to click on and see what it does? My live audience here. Which of these should I click on? It's not a hard question. Which of these? Which one?
The bottom right corner. What does the end of beef mean?
So this is interesting. We could have seen about other topics, but there's a reason that an article like that's on here, right? So the end of beef means for a sense of self. That is an intriguing question, right? So you click on it. And so there is a 200-word excerpt from it. And you can scroll down after you've seen what it is, and you can go read it in New York Times style magazine. You can add to a collection. You can do this on your cell phone. You're a high school student who's interested in current events, and the teacher says, I want you to look at Bunk. I want you to find the articles that you're interested in. He's come back with beef. You do this and you sort of see, oh, view connections. What does that do? Well, it shows if we start with this article here with tagging are all the different articles in different categories that this links to. Agriculture, American food, animal rights, cooking, evolution, foodways, livestock, food, and nutrition, right? That's the idea. And so you can choose on it. Which of these, since we're following your curiosity, would you like to follow?
American food.
American food for 500. So we click on that. There's 37 articles about American food. And it branches in whatever happened to peanut butter and jelly. That's interesting, isn't it? That's written by a partner of ours. And so we're generating these new things. But the whole idea is you've already done it, right? We tricked you into learning more about American history than you thought you wanted to know, right? But we've shown you that it's deeply patterned and that this is what I call ambient history. It's the history that's being sold to you every day in your video games, your television shows, the cartoons, the movies you watch, right? Your social media feeds. History is not the stuff in the textbook with the multiple choice test at the end. It's the air you breathe and trying to make it visible. So you can see there's now 10,000 articles in this and growing every day. And you could go back to the first one that we could choose. This one only has an idea, but let's say that we were interested in understanding how there's history of something like Russia's war on Ukraine. Okay. Now you can see there are other idea links, but there are other place links. Here are other articles about Ukraine, or here are other time links that would tell us about the ways that and if you click on time, there's different dimensions of time, view connections that you can see previously, simultaneously, before, and all the different ways it can do all this, right? So we're going back to the very beginning of the story I told you about, the idea of SGML and tagging. What we're doing now, but with a very, by now, sophisticated tagging system. This is all radio buttons, and it's like the students read the entire article. They're trained, they're specialized in particular areas. They tag them, and then Tony and Catherine review all of this, and then once it's approved, it's put in there. So it's not machine readable, but it has this level of interpretation. But so you can see all these different kinds of topics. Eastern Europe, you're interested in, that maybe not where you would have begun thinking about all this, but it could spin out. So you said, so that's Bunk. It's very cool, I think. But you'll notice that this is another theme I'm going to make. When I decided what I want to do, I actually hired a commercial firm to help us design it, because I wanted it to look so, and it works beautifully on your phone, and you can save a collection on one device and it's saved on another. Then you can send it to your teacher. And we make a lot of this what we're calling 10 through 14, grades 10 through 14, right? And I know you folks are partners with the Gardner Institute, and so are we, to try to make things that are engaging because we found out if a student in a community college, say, fails US history, they're not likely to go on to community college, right? So we're trying to think of ways to show, I know you have this requirement of US history class, you don't want to take it, you want an accounting degree or whatever, but we're going to try to make this as engaging, show you how it's important and intriguing about all this. If I'm not, has this changed since I was on it before? I don't believe that Boycott's article was on there, but anyway, but then we invented along the way New American History, which is pulling together, we took backstory, for which we had over 300 episodes, and put them in a new archive that has all this same kind of tagging. So Kevin, you're in there in a new form now, the backstory, but then it connects to all these other kinds of things. But we also did all the maps of American Panorama. We also did a vector, as I was called by my son-in-law. My son-in-law and my daughter made a PBS series, Emmy Award winning, of Future of America's Past. We did a great episode about the Chicago riot of 1919, by the way, in which we come here, we were on the place where the riot began. We toured what some of the communities look like today. We talked to people who were doing historical commemoration art projects. We went to Manzanar, we went to Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, we went to the Shoshone people with the Transcontinental Railroad, and all those places where people are working to keep the past alive. But so you see it connects with Bunk as well. But the critical thing here is, I mentioned Annie Evans before, she creates these learning resources because teachers don't have time to pull together all this plenitude on the web, right? So Annie goes through, who's the head of social studies in Charlottesville before, and very gifted and much beloved teacher, tells teachers things who might not be expert in. This is the Green Book, you know, the bad movie about this, but it was a real thing, right? Black travelers in the South trying to figure out where they could stay. And he goes through and gives the vocabulary for somebody who's maybe never even doesn't have a master's degree, teacher tips for read for understanding, then all these different kind of engagements of ways to do it, and questions you might ask, all the different kinds of sources that you might use, excerpts from the document itself, and you can see that it gives basically what the teacher, what he or she needs to do. But you can also, there's a student version of it as well that doesn't tell you which standards this fulfills or whatever, because students don't care about that. But instead does have vocabulary, but how you would use it as a student. She's made many dozens of all of these for important issues in American history. But the thing is, we trust teachers. We're not telling, I've never taught middle school. I would be terrified of the idea of having to do this. Annie's not. And she said, remember what I told you before about the map of foreign-born population? Fourth graders can use this ed. It's never too early to start talking. They know about injustice. They think we're lying to them if we act like it's all just, you know, the Pilgrims and Indians do lunch, right? You need to go ahead and to think of ways to teach all this. So Annie and I both had a chance to help review the standards of learning for Virginia. In all of this, we're trying to do things that are engaging the past in all the ways. Some of it's going to be hard history, but some of it's just going to be interesting history and the sense of joy and excitement and the actual personalities in it all. So trying to use all the different modalities of this. Okay, so that's New American History. Now, I got some of the questions that Alexis sent before, and I know that a criticism people have made of me is, Ed, you make things that are too freaking big to be of any use to anybody else. You know, so you build the Valley of Shadow instead of building a cabin, you build a pyramid so that nobody else ever tries to even do anything like this. So who else wants to give 14 years of their life to building something like this, which is a good question. Or who could raise that much money? Or those are all good questions. So this is paid for. When I finished the presidency, trustees said, instead of naming something for you, we'll create this endowment, because that's what I asked for. And so what I'd like to do is continue my work. And it's sponsored by the University of Richmond. And so this is a gift that is giving to schools across the country, and that we're making it, and our students are involved in it. And so that's how this is being paid for. It's another selling body parts, 8 years of president, and you can make this too, right? But I decided that's what mattered. But while I was teaching, I recognized that there would need to be projects that people could make for nothing. That's what I'm going to end with. These are projects that made by my first year class that we went into. This is the Richmond Planet, the African American newspaper from Richmond from 1894 to 1909. There's digital versions of it online that those of you who've read newspapers online know that they have like a 95% accuracy rate, which means they're filled with useless text. These students, however, have 18-year-old eyes and can go back through and read the originals and correct the transcript. And then we share it, put it back into the archive. We improve the transcript. But in the meantime, so I said, okay, what can you tell me about African-American life between the end of Reconstruction and World War II? Booker T. Washington and W.B. Du Bois disagreed. That's kind of the brown page that we were talking about. That's kind of what the textbooks show, feature this. And it's like God, I bet other things happened, didn't it? So what if we looked through the eyes of the Black newspaper, one of the leading newspapers there? But here's what I want you to do. I want you to design this newspaper, this website for yourself 18 months ago when you were a junior in a high school and didn't know anything about this. What should it look like? They said, well, we don't know anything, right? So we're just going to say explore, right? Because we don't know enough to ask a question. So we just designed this on, and we're going to say we still don't know anything. So we want to see random articles, just a list of them. We want to see a word cloud that would give us an idea of where we might click. We want to give us an image gallery. So even though this is a newspaper from the turn of the century, the images are, not compelling by today's standards, but they're cool. And all this is a way, this is about African-American hairstyles. Okay, that would be interesting, but it's all linked together again. So you see, everything's about hypertext, but we also don't know anything. So we go browse by year just to find out, oh, there's the actual, what the past looks like, right? It's not all transcribed. Look how hard that is to read. How do we know this? And this is because the students themselves have gone through and transcribed all this and made a contribution. And so, and then you can search it, and all this is all built on a FOMECA, and just built, and the students sign it, that have their names from it, and that would be the other part of about from the first page. And they work so much harder knowing that they're making something that and you can see this where our students are from: California, Connecticut, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Missouri, Vermont, Florida. And the idea is that they work much harder than they did for a paper that only the professor was going to see, and they're helping each other figure out, because then they had to interpret each year. They owned a year. Now you found this. Now you tell a general audience who doesn't know anything about it what this looks like. Then we shared this with the Black History Museum in Richmond, to do this. And we made another one about another hard subject, which is Reconstruction. And I said, what can you tell me about Reconstruction? Go online and tell me, what do we know about Reconstruction? And they came back and the main thing about Reconstruction is it failed. And I said, the most profound experiment in democratic governance in American history, the only thing we know about it is that it failed, or that it empowered people who'd been held in perpetual bondage to create schools, churches, literacy, reconstitute families. Maybe there's more to Reconstruction than it failed. So I want you to go into it. And so this is another class, and they did some of the same kinds of principles of how we would know. And why is people one of the largest categories? You come in, there's 940 articles to have, and then you suddenly, the Ku Klux Klan, railroads, another Ku Klux bill, the president traps himself. What? Politics back then was like that? Well, what's going on here? And it's the same idea of conning young people into learning more about the past than they ever intended. So there's a summary, a transcription of it, the collection, you can see exactly where it comes from, and the original source. So this is true to all the standards of the profession, but it's being done by young people. So we did a demonstration of the Black Virginia thing in the museum. It's based in the building created by the editor of that paper. And people were coming in for an exhibit, and they were saying, hey, look at what we're doing. So the next day we met in class and said, how was that? And they said, are you graduate students? They said, no, we're 19. And they were so proud they could do it. So one young man from the library helped us set up the Omeka thing. We used Google Docs to do all this work. And then when it was ready, when I approved it, it was imported into this. And now we have this site. So this is a way of harvesting the digitization of newspapers, the proliferation of open source media, the fact that all our students now have some sort of electronic device that they can do this on their own, riding on a bus back home to Missouri or whatever, and taking advantage of what the commercial world is offering. Again, not really, Omeka does grow out of George Mason University and out of open source idea. So you can see that democratization can include doing something for free and making this a meaningful educational experience for the students. They're going to remember this more than they would have having read 5 books and writing a paper about it. It's something they go home and show their parents, look what we've made. And now we're sharing this, and that middle school kids now can actually understand Black history in a way they couldn't before. So that's a kind of a breathless overview of what I've been doing. You'll see it's all a series of experiments. We're just we don't know what's going to work. We don't know where the interest or demand, if we wait until the market tells us what it wants, it's too late. We have to have faith in our own disciplines. Why are we interested in this? Why do we think it's useful in English or history or any other humanities discipline to do these things and work in the grain of what we already know and are passionate about? And in this case, we know the kids all across America are reading Walden. Wouldn't it be cool if we could make that more meaningful to them? But we know the kids across America think that American history is learning a list of presidents or something. What if we could help teachers who are doing 5 preps a day, who don't have time to do all these kind of things, but know they could come to New American History or Bunk. If you've got 30 minutes, there's a war in Ukraine. Let's see what journalists, all kinds of historians, what are they saying about it? How might we get some sense of where this came from? If I go to Bunk, it's going to be harvesting the best of journalism that's going on. It's going to be tagged. There'll be not just one article after another, but we're branching into these different kinds of things. We can have kids respond to their own curiosity. I want everybody to tell me the 3 articles they find most interesting. Then I will get it as the teacher and say, okay, 10 of you thought this was interesting. Let's call this up on the screen and talk about it right now. Right? So trying to democratize the teaching of American history by being of aid to our colleagues who are teachers, but also trying to be of aid to young people who don't have any idea why they should be interested in this. So that's what I've been doing. So Alexis, I'm going to ask you to ask questions, easy ones, and we'll talk about whatever people would like to talk about.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your talk, Dr. Ayers, and for helping us understand the past and potentials of digital history for your many projects. My name is Alexis Gilbo, and I'm the other co-director of the Digital Humanities Initiative. I'm also a postdoctoral research associate and a historian of multiracial slavery and on freedom in the Midwest and Ohio Valley. I'm very excited to continue to share digital humanities events and support existing projects and new projects at UIC and beyond. Now we're going to turn to questions like Dr. Ayers said. And so if you have any questions, please submit them to our Q&A. But I thought I would just start with, do you have any tips for new digital humanists or potential digital humanists? Is there anything fundamental to learn to get started on a project?
Yeah, I think, don't forget how much you already know from having been a practitioner of the discipline, okay? So rather than thinking of yourself as new, thinking of yourself as experienced, who's looking for a new way to express it. I think that there is now so much either free, open source, or just sort of a lingua franca of a PDF file, things like that. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have, and take what the commercial world is giving us. This is going to be a major theme, that the commercial world will never generate what we need. We're going to have to do this ourselves. And I did a talk for a class yesterday here, and somebody said, so how much does this cost? And I said, it's free. The whole point is it's free and it's nonpartisan. Now I say that's important because teachers, as you know, are under risk right now, and they need to be shown, to be able to show supervisors that what they're showing is safe. So if you go to New American History, which is on here, you scroll down, you'll see that the American Library Association awarded us Best Digital Tool for Teaching and Learning. This is American Association of School Librarians. Who could be more trusted than the American Association of School Librarians? And it's important that we do this. So the point of all this is, think about, why is this worth my time to do it? Who would benefit from this? Who would be interested in it? What would that person who's not irrationally interested in this subject the way that we are, how might I make this interesting to them? So I would say I watched back in the days with quantification, people wreck their entire careers by spending years gathering data in the hopes that it would add up to something, right? I lucked out by being able to go down that road and working out, but there was no guarantee that learning to use a mainframe computer on these batch jobs and all that was going to give me anything. So don't make this any harder than it has to be, is my advice. Use open source tools, use things that are common, that are not open source, like a PDF file, but it's free. But Annie has taught me Google Docs is a great way to make things that can be shared with everybody at no cost. Recognize that there's some corporation you're going to be getting in bed with in all this, you know, but Annie is pointing out that, you know, Chromebooks are cheap and are widely used in schools. Many, you know, when I started all this, the digital divide, which is still real, but has narrowed remarkably because of the purchase of units to be loaned to students. So to recognize that in the early days where you had to persuade people that something digital was something meaningful, now we have to persuade people that something digital is has its roots in something analog and in something real. So the short answer is take what is made available and remember the days of when we really did have to write script to show an image on a screen and when we had to squeeze everything through a 2400 baud modem. The Valley of the Shadow looks the way it does because we couldn't have images on there because it would bog down the computer so much. So just to think about how fortunate we are that we're all carrying around supercomputers in our pockets, right? And to take advantage of that. So it's easier than it used to be, is my advice, but don't make it any harder than it has to be. Okay.
Sounds great. Do you have a question?
There's some questions.
All right. Rachel has some questions from chat.
All right.
So the first one says, Dr. Ayers, thank you immensely for coming to speak with us today.
You're welcome. Thanks very much, everybody. That's been great.
Could you talk about the open source program you use to create and publish your students' DH work? I know you coordinated efforts through Google Docs, but wanted some additional information.
Yeah, it's a program called Omeka, and it's through the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media, and it's relatively easy to use. That you can just go look for Omeka online, and you'll have immediate access to it. OMEKA, and so as we think too, related to other things that are now free like that. JSTOR, the entire scholarly record, is available now in these kinds of forms that we can use. So, but that Omeka is, again, I was president, so I didn't have time to do all this, but with a few emails was able to tell my colleague, this is how we would like to adjust Omeka to be able to show a word cloud, to generate a random articles list every time you come to it, to do all those all those are capacities that Omeka already has. And as you can see, that's enough to make a site that can do a lot of heavy lifting. So that's the main open source. There are a lot of things that I'm not conversant in, that everything on the DSL, the Digital Scholarship Lab, is an open source, okay? And all the evidence that we use is also shared freely with my colleagues. And all the things that in the category of using what's available to you, back in the day, I had to go into the original computer files and guess how I might change county boundaries between 1890 and 1900 in the South. But now all those county boundaries are available free for everybody. And so GIS has enormous numbers of things that you can download on GitHub, GitHub. And so, but matter of fact, there's so much that you need to be careful, but that's why it always begins with, what question are you trying to answer? Okay. All of these things begin with a purpose, not with something, a cool machine I might be able to figure out some. And unfortunately, a lot of DH is like that. Here's a cool new thing. I wonder how I might do a test sample to show what it could do. Well, if we only have examples of tests and never actually anything actually finished, we're not going to be of use. So think of an audience, think of a purpose, think of a timeline, think of a corpus that you already know, right? or command. Think of things that your university or college can make freely available to you, like that ICPSR data is freely available. And so the question now is not really so much a scarcity of tools, it's a scarcity of imagination.
There's a few more questions that.
Yeah, sure. Why don't you pick one more and then I'll ask one.
Okay, great. There's a lot of praise coming in, so.
Would it kill you to read it all?
Yeah, yeah. And if there's any questions we don't get to, I'll try to answer on our website and in our email afterwards with some resources.
This question came in pretty quick, so or pretty early on, so I'll ask this one. How can libraries, archives, and museums support and encourage digital humanities?
Yeah. I'm actually in print saying this, so that it shows that I'm not pandering. Librarians have been the heroes in the digital revolution. If we allowed the disciplines to sustain this, we wouldn't have anything. It's the librarians who've understood, growing out of their own commitment to preservation and access, who enabled this to happen. I think that librarians already are knowing how to do this, but the Valley of the Shadow, it's in the library at UVA. You notice that the URL is valley.live.virginia.edu because librarians understand that, okay, this looks cool right now, but people still might be interested in 10 years from now. It's our job to preserve it. So it was librarians who went back in and rebuilt the Valley of the Shadow so that it continues to work. So they can help by doing what they've been doing, which is fulfilling their mission to make sure that this is sustainable. I'm on an ACLS working group right now about sustainability of digital scholarship produced by people who might not have fortunate positions in universities that can sustain all of this, right? So librarians could be thinking about their communities. Who's doing cool work in some ethnic community or some neighborhood that perhaps we could be an ally and to help preserve and present this. So I think, but in the same way that people thinking in the grain of their humanities discipline is the way to go, librarians continue to think in the grain of their great missions of access and preservation is the way to go.
Great. That was almost like in line with the next question I was going to ask, and talking about just digital humanities as a very collaborative venture. And we agree to the Digital Humanities Initiative is housed in the Institute for the Humanities and the University Library. And that's just been a great collaboration for us as well. So kind of building off of kind of the end of your discussion about working with different communities, I have a question about digital humanities and historical archives, working with multi-ethnic communities. How would you characterize the relationship between digital humanities and multi-ethnic or historical archives in general? What is unique or distinct about this relationship?
Well, we tried to do this with Black Virginia to think about what at a museum that's hard pressed to sustain itself, what could we give that they would know how to use? It's the same way with teachers. Teachers know what they're doing. So, I gave a talk yesterday about efforts we're doing at Richmond about a burying ground. And so there will be a digital component of that where we present the genealogical information that we've learned and so forth. So I think a lot of these things one of the things that I've loved about being in the digital humanities from early on is that it forces you to be collaborative, which is not necessarily the first instinct of all humanists, because you need to be alone to write a book, that's what I've been doing for the last 2 years, is just sitting at home writing a book and using all the incredible digital books and things that are available now would have been impossible otherwise. But I guess my answer is related to what I said before, toward what purpose, right? And you have to honor the desires of what community you're trying to serve. So think about, I don't think it would have occurred to our Black History Museum to go through and digitize the newspapers from the era, because it's not really, but if you have 16, 18-year-olds all parallel processing, in one semester, we could make something that then was an asset to them. But you have to begin by asking them what you need. What do you want? Not presuming that you would have any knowledge for this. And I was saying yesterday, the burying ground, if we had just designed the memorial without talking to the descendant communities, it would look quite different. They insisted that we show hope in it. And the university, kind of feeling really guilty about what it had done, might not have had the courage to have talked about perseverance and determination. But if the descendant community tells us to do that, then it seems like then we're empowered to do that, right? So be truly collaborative is my answer.
Yeah.
Collaboration begins by listening from the outset and not thinking just because we have access to these tools that we know better than you what we might do with it.
Yeah, I love that question. What do you need as an important starting question?
I realize in the spirit of our topic, I didn't show one of the things, if that's okay, in Southern Journey, went up to the present and included immigrant populations and native populations. I was talking with our visitor from Northwestern yesterday in our panel afterwards, because I'm going to show you a problem that I had. So, you know, as she was saying yesterday, people imagine that indigenous American Indians have somehow are not still here. We were making sure that that was not the case. It's taking a while to load up, run through it so fast. And by following, and also you should look at this because it has the Great Migration in it, and you start seeing we started adding all of the whole United States in this, so you can actually watch Chicago change, including the depopulation right now of Black people from Chicago. Thanks for coming. It's just a cool thing. You can watch the interstate highway system grow. But what I wanted to show is that population change of Latin American immigrants and their descendants, to show how rapidly you can do this. So in the same way, you know, we know that and that's just one decade, that's 2000 to 2010, right? But also then to show Asian immigrants and their descendants, but then also this is something that, but if you look at
Your screen is sharing.
Oh, is it not sharing?
I think it's maybe just to the room. Sorry about that.
Is it sharing now?
There you go.
Okay. So, and I was asking Pam about this yesterday. 2010, Americans could identify as belonging to more than one ethnicity for the first time. And the number of people who claim Native American ancestry skyrocketed. And look at the number of people who claim to be Seminole, and look where they live. The number of people who claim to be Lumbee, the same place that Lumbee people have been. Creek is where they had lived before. Choctaw. And so on one hand, this is very problematic because the people who are sovereign nations and are very carefully keeping record of who's a part of the community and not. But to see that despite dispossession, the people from these communities still live there raises an important question. So the point being is that this digital allows us to do, you don't see many books that have white people and Black people and Native people and immigrants in them all at the same time. And so multi-ethnic, it's disappeared behind us. I don't know if it's still disappeared. There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
So did that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. Rachel, do you have a question you want to finish us up with, or I got one?
There's one more that came in 2 minutes ago. I thought it was pretty.
Sure, yeah.
So someone says, on the issue of bias, isn't bias introduced by the choices made of what to include in the database in the first place? I.e., some sources are not included because of licensing restrictions, or because they're not deemed credible by whoever is making the decision, or they are not already digitized, etc. How do you make sure that the databases that students are exploring provide enough background from all perspectives?
That's a great question. I would say that we tried to address that as much as we could with Bunk, and this is a little surprising that we could get away with this because we are not violating copyright, because we're not presenting more than 200 words, and then we're linking people into it, right? So the trick here, if you look at this, I would say most of these would be considered to be left-leaning publications because most of the people who are writing about the past are, okay? Is that a bias or is it a reflection of what the universe of that looks like? We work really hard to have conservative journals and blogs that are responsible reflected in here as well. Any digital, and I do think it's a great question because the rhetoric of the digital, and I've heard myself descend into it, is all about plenitude and limitlessness and so forth. I mean, the Valley of the Shadow is, from the very beginning, I chose these two places. Why did I choose them? I chose them because A, they were engulfed by the Civil War, and B, there were two newspapers from both places every time along the way. It turns out they were the place where Frederick Douglass met John Brown in the North. It turns out it's the place with the largest single collection of African-American soldiers' records from one family. Did I know that? No, right? I don't think that, so I try to address this in different ways. In Bunk, try to show, and it's important that when the American Library Association endorses this, and in my home state where the legislature just ruled out that a law that would have prevented us teaching divisive concepts. The whole idea of Bunk is that it's about difference of opinion, right? And so that's part of the answer too, is by saying, January 6th committee investigation made by history. You look at this, the whole idea is there are different ways to look at it, and which is a different thing. So when students come in to college to believe that there's only difference is bias, to give them a tool that allows them to analyze bias, to see it, right, is what we're doing. So rather than imagining that there's some ideal universe of information that is just transparent, because even the census we've seen is distorted, what looks like the most transparent subject of all, the source of all. So I'd say lean into the fact that bias, interpretation, inequity, all those things are things you have to think about when you're interpreting the past. As I say, it's not a bug, it's a feature, right? It's kind of what we do. Kevin and I were having coffee this morning. I said, doing history is not like architecture. It's like finding a piece of driftwood on the beach you're trying to make a lamp out of, right? It's like, how do I adopt this thing that has this irregular, misshapen form, and how do I make sense of it? Letting people, and that's the whole idea of the Valley of the Shadow. There's lots of stuff in there that doesn't go anywhere because that's what the past is like, folks. And if we have everything homogenized and processed so that it's all just one story, you're missing that. That's a form of bias in and of itself. I will do this indefinitely.
Yeah. And I will too, so I'll wrap us up.
That's not a warning, folks. That's a statement of willingness to.
Yeah, no, I really like that as an ending, and I look forward to seeing what students and faculty at UIC and beyond can do percolating in this world of tools and archives and access. Thank you so much for all of your questions and for tuning in from wherever you're at, and for the few of us here in person. We hope to see you at future workshops and also a conference in the fall on the multi-ethnic digital humanities. We will explore the ways that digital platforms and method both advance the scholarship on race and ethnicity and connect underrepresented communities, identities, histories, languages, and cultures with scholars, students, and interested publics. Thank you again to Dr. Ayers for being here at the Institute for the Humanities, Department of History, Phi Beta Kappa Honor Society, Creative and Digital Services, the University of Illinois Presidential Initiative, and the University Library, and all of you again. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.